The loudest man on reality TV just fell completely silent, and it wasn't by choice. For years, fans of Axemen asked where the legendary Swamp Man vanished to, but the answer was buried under a legal gag order that changed everything. For those who spent the late 2000s and early 2010s glued to the History Channel, Shelby Stanga was not just a reality television star. He was an absolute force of nature. With his wild, bloodshot eyes, his untamed graying hair, his trademark chainsaw, and a voice that sounded like it had been dragged through miles of Louisiana gravel, he was the undisputed king of the bayou. Millions of viewers tuned in every single week to watch him plunge into black swamp water, wrestle massive snapping turtles, and pull out ancient, priceless timber from the murky depths. He was the definition of unscripted chaos. But then, almost overnight, the screaming stopped. The swamp buggy went cold, the chainsaw fell silent, and Shelby Stanga vanished from the airwaves. To understand why this matters right now, you have to look at the massive explosion of blue-collar reality television that dominated the media landscape a decade ago. We are talking about shows like Axemen, Swamp People, Deadliest Catch, and Ice Road Truckers. These programs did not rely on polished Hollywood actors. Instead, they went into the deepest, most dangerous corners of America to find real men doing incredibly hazardous jobs for very little money. The History Channel, which had spent decades broadcasting traditional historical documentaries about World War II and ancient civilizations, underwent a massive corporate pivot. They realized that there was a goldmine in exploiting the rugged, raw lifestyle of the American working class. But as these shows grew into multi-million-dollar empires, a dark underbelly began to form. Behind the rugged charm and the high-stakes edits lay a complex, predatory legal framework designed by corporate lawyers in Los Angeles and New York. These production companies used contracts of adhesion, massive, highly restrictive legal documents that stripped these local, often undereducated workers of their rights, their likeness, and their ability to speak freely. Shelby Stanga was the ultimate prize for these producers, but he also became their greatest legal headache. When his larger-than-life personality clashed with the cold reality of corporate contracts, the stage was set for a massive legal shutdown. But wait, if you think Shelby's sudden disappearance was just about a standard pay dispute or a tired reality star wanting to retire, you are missing the most shocking part of the puzzle. The real twist came when Shelby's untamed, rule-breaking lifestyle collided head-on with the criminal justice system in a way that changed his life forever. In October of 2014, at the absolute peak of his global fame, a heavily armed sheriff's department executed a felony warrant for Shelby's arrest. The charge was not a typical bar fight or a minor traffic violation. He was arrested for what local authorities called botanical violence. A single logging mistake in a muddy Louisiana bayou suddenly gave the television network's legal team a massive, terrifying lever of absolute control over Shelby's entire life. This arrest transformed his standard production contract into a permanent, ironclad legal gag order that threatened to destroy him financially and lock him in a prison cell if he ever dared to speak his truth. The transition from a simple, isolated swamp logger to a global television celebrity is a jarring experience for anyone, but for a man like Shelby, who grew up surviving in the wild swamps of Tangipahoa Parish, it was like stepping onto another planet. Shelby's early life was defined by extreme isolation and survival. Raised by a single mother in the swampy woods of Botanical, Louisiana, he had to teach himself how to live off the land from a very young age. He left school early, avoided the dangers of the local area, and dedicated his life to mastering the bayou. He became a master of salvage logging, a highly dangerous profession that involves diving into alligator-infested waters to recover sinker cypress logs. These are ancient trees that sank to the bottom of rivers and swamps over a century ago during the southern logging boom. Because they have been preserved in oxygen-depleted mud, the wood is incredibly valuable, often selling for thousands of dollars to high-end builders. When the producers of original productions, the company behind Axemen, stumbled upon Shelby, they knew they had found television gold. They put him on the screen, and he instantly became the breakout star of the entire franchise. But as the ratings soared, so did the tension behind the scenes. Shelby began to realize that the massive wealth his antics were generating for the network was not trickling down to his pockets. He wanted what he was promised, but the network had other plans, and they were preparing to use their legal machinery to keep him in line. To truly understand how this trap was sprung, we have to look back at the chaotic glory days of Shelby Stanga on Axemen. He was introduced as the leader of S&S Aqua logging, and from his very first episode, he redefined what was acceptable on reality television. While other logging crews were using massive, million-dollar yarders and heavy machinery in the forests of Oregon and Washington, Shelby was working with a rusted-out boat, a handheld chainsaw, and his loyal companion, Willie Dog. The production crew quickly realized that the more dangerous and absurd Shelby's behavior was, the higher the ratings climbed. Consider 3 specific examples that cemented his legendary status, but also highlighted the massive risks he was taking. First, there was the famous incident where Shelby took a wealthy, clean-cut log buyer out into the deep swamp. Instead of a professional business meeting, Shelby subjected the buyer to a terrifying ride through the bayou, got him completely soaked in muddy, snake-infested water, and even had guns fired in his direction, all while laughing hysterically and telling him that none of this was supposed to happen. It made for incredible television, but it exposed the massive liability issues that the production company was constantly trying to manage. Second, Shelby's casual relationship with deadly swamp wildlife was a constant source of anxiety for the legal teams. He would routinely swim in waters known to contain 15-foot alligators and venomous water moccasins. On more than one occasion, he captured venomous snakes with his bare hands, and the show aired footage that made it look as though he was biting the heads off these creatures. While fans cheered his fearless nature, safety inspectors and insurance underwriters were having collective panic attacks behind the scenes. Third, there was his custom-built swamp vehicle, a bizarre, heavy metal contraption that looked like a cross between a monster truck and a tank, designed to drive through deep mud and crush small trees. Shelby operated this vehicle with zero regard for personal safety or environmental regulations, once jumping off a log to escape a near collision just seconds before his machinery crashed. These stunts generated tens of millions of dollars in advertising revenue for the History Channel. But here is the cold, hard truth of the reality television industry. The people who take the physical risks are almost never the ones who get rich. While a top-tier actor on a scripted television show receives residuals, union protections, and massive episodic fees, reality television stars are often classified as independent contractors. This means they are exempt from basic labor laws, have no collective bargaining power, and receive flat-rate stipends that do not reflect the massive profits of the network. Shelby eventually realized that the producers were not keeping their side of the financial bargain. He publicly expressed his frustration, stating that the pay was not what they had originally agreed upon. He wanted out, but walking away from a major network is not like quitting a normal job. The moment Shelby tried to assert his independence, the legal machinery began to grind him down. This brings us directly to the bizarre events of late 2014. The Tangipahoa Parish Sheriff's Office arrested Shelby Stanga and charged him with felony theft. The cause of this arrest was a massive, ancient cypress tree. According to the police report, Shelby had cut down a cypress tree that did not belong to him. The neighbors claimed that the tree was on their private property, and furthermore, that the tree had been designated as state property since 1963. To a traditional swamp logger who had spent his entire life treating the bayou as a common, lawless frontier, cutting down a tree in the swamp did not feel like a crime. In southern Louisiana, shifting water levels, flooding, and dense overgrowth make property lines incredibly confusing. What looks like open, public water one month can be designated as private property the next. Collecting physical evidence in such a hostile environment is a nightmare, which is why it took nearly 3 years from the time the tree was cut to the day Shelby was finally arrested. Even though Shelby was released from jail the very next day, the damage was done. A felony theft charge in the state of Louisiana is an incredibly serious matter that carries the threat of years of prison time. For a television network and a production company, this arrest was both a crisis and a massive legal opportunity. Reality television contracts almost always contain moral turpitude clauses. These clauses state that if a cast member engages in behavior that brings public disrepute, arrest, or scandal, the network has the right to immediately terminate their pay, seize their intellectual property, and sue them for damages. But instead of firing Shelby, the network saw a way to gain absolute leverage. They knew that Shelby was the heart and soul of their swamp programming. Without him, the ratings for Axemen would plummet, and indeed, when he left, the show's viewership suffered immensely. The producers desperately wanted to bring him back for spin-off shows like The Legend of Shelby the Swamp Man and The Return of Shelby the Swamp Man. They offered him a quiet settlement for his legal troubles. While the exact details of the resolution were never made public, the circumstantial evidence points to a classic structured legal agreement. In exchange for the network's legal resources and financial assistance in making his felony charges disappear, Shelby had to sign a devastatingly strict non-disclosure agreement. He was effectively placed under a total legal gag order. He was prohibited from speaking about his contracts, his pay disputes, the reality of how the show was produced, or the details of his arrest. The loudest man on television had to buy his freedom with his absolute silence. To understand how a legal gag order like this can completely erase a person's voice, you have to look at the predatory mechanics of modern reality television contracts. These are not standard employment agreements. They are legally binding traps designed to protect the multi-billion-dollar conglomerates that own the networks. First, let's look at the waiver of reputational damage. When a participant signs a contract for a show like Axemen, they agree that the production company has the absolute right to edit the footage however they see fit. The contract explicitly states that the participant may be portrayed in a way that is defamatory, embarrassing, unfavorable, or exposes them to public ridicule and humiliation. This is the legal shield that allows producers to engage in frankenbiting, the practice of taking a word from one sentence and splicing it with a word from another to create an entirely fake statement that makes the participant look like a villain or a fool. The star has waived their right to sue for defamation, meaning they must sit in silence while their reputation is destroyed on global television. Second, the financial penalties for violating a non-disclosure agreement in reality TV are ruinous. On major unscripted programs, the standard penalty for leaking information or speaking to the press without authorization can be as high as $500,000 per violation. For a working-class logger from the swamp, a single slip of the tongue on a podcast or an interview could result in instant bankruptcy. Third, these contracts almost always contain mandatory arbitration clauses. If a star has a dispute over unpaid wages, unsafe working conditions, or breach of contract, they are legally barred from taking the network to a public court. Instead, they are forced into a private, secret arbitration process where the network's highly paid corporate lawyers hold all the cards. The public never hears the testimony, the evidence is never released, and the final ruling is kept under lock and key. The system is designed to ensure that the secrets of reality television stay buried in the dark. What happened to Shelby Stanga is not an isolated incident. It is the standard operating procedure for the entire unscripted television industry. Over the past several years, we have seen a massive wave of reality TV stars starting to fight back against these exploitative legal practices. Take the case of Jeremy Hartwell, a contestant on the hit Netflix series Love is Blind. Hartwell filed a landmark class action lawsuit against the production company, alleging that participants were subjected to inhumane working conditions, including extreme sleep deprivation, isolation from the outside world, a lack of adequate food and water, and the constant promotion of alcohol to manufacture emotional breakdowns. Hartwell's lawsuit claimed that the contract he signed essentially classified him as an independent contractor to avoid paying minimum wage and overtime, despite the producers controlling every single second of his day. Another shocking example is Renee Potch, a contestant from the same franchise who spoke out publicly about her traumatic experience on the set. In response, the production company immediately filed a massive $4 million arbitration claim against her, accusing her of violating her non-disclosure agreement. This massive financial threat was intended to serve as a warning to every other reality star. If you speak the truth, we will ruin you. Even high-profile celebrities like Bethany Frankel of the Real Housewives franchise have recently launched campaigns to expose how networks use draconian non-disclosure agreements to cover up civil and criminal wrongs on set. These legal battles prove that the reality television industry relies on a systematic structure of silence, where the glamorous promise of fame is used to lure people into signing away their fundamental rights. Shelby Stanga was a man who could survive devastating floods, hurricane-force winds, deadly swamp predators, and the hazards of a razor-sharp chainsaw. He was a true legend of the Louisiana Bayou, a man who lived on his own terms long before the television cameras ever arrived. But while the swamp could not tame the swamp man, the cold, calculated legal machinery of corporate Hollywood did. Today, Shelby has retreated back to the quiet life in the Louisiana swamps, far away from the flashing lights, the deceptive edits, and the predatory contracts of the reality TV world. His silence for all these years was not a choice, but a survival strategy in a legal war he could not win. His story serves as a chilling warning to anyone who dreams of reality television stardom. The most dangerous beast in the swamp does not have razor-sharp teeth or a toxic bite. It carries a briefcase, it speaks in legalese, and it writes its traps in the fine print of a 90-page contract. But Shelby's story is far from over. If you want to know what happened to the other legendary members of the Axemen cast and the shocking, tragic secrets that the producers tried to bury when the cameras stopped rolling, click on the video on your screen right now. We are pulling back the curtain on the darkest mysteries of television history, and you do not want to miss what we uncover next.